Welcome to IdeaGen TV. Today we have with us Mr. JD Crouch, CEO and President of the USO. JD, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks, George.
You know, JD, what an incredible moment in time in terms of the opportunity to reimagine, to rebuild, to look around corners. Can you tell our global audience a little bit about yourself, as well as your role and responsibilities as CEO and President of the USO?
Yeah. Well, I'm currently leading the USO, which is the sort of premier military service organization that was started back in 1941 by President Franklin Roosevelt prior to the war. But my background has really been more in sort of foreign policy and those sorts of things. And as you know, George, I served as our ambassador in Romania and served presidents in the White House and served in the Pentagon and the like. So my background has really been oriented around that, about thinking about what does it take for the United States to be prosperous in the world, how to be safe in this world. And as a result, the international system's pretty chaotic. And although I know it seems a little chaotic around here these days too, but and as a result of that, you sort of get used to having to deal with changes and deal with major changes. And obviously we're in one of those right now. So taking the USO through that has been very exciting. My people have been fantastic in the way that they've really pivoted around the need to help service members and their families through this COVID pandemic and all the other things that are going on, particularly in the United States right now with hurricanes and civil unrest and the like. So it's been a very challenging but also very exciting time.
Well, and you know what you find in times like these, JD, and I'm sure you echo this, is that during times of crisis, many have said there are many opportunities. And when we talk about resiliency, when we talk about leadership, when we talk about all these key traits that are so necessary, and also, of course, partnerships, something that the USO has been an incredible leader on for so many years. By the way, because of that, you're thriving today. You're able to make it through what is one of the most difficult periods in human history, where a few short months ago in January, we were looking at the runway to 2030. And now, 6 months later, the entire planet, again, for probably the first time in human history, is facing the same, what we like to call an invisible enemy, right? And here we are in the midst of that. But because of your foresight, your strategic insights into partnering, into having an impact in communities, you're able to now actually deliver that impact that your mission states. So with that, with everything happening in the world today, what do you see as the right way? Are we on the right path to changing the world, or are we sort of set back?
Well, look, I think that every one of a crisis like this, of any kind, and remember and if you think about it, the USO was born in crisis, right? We were born in the run-up. We call it the run-up to World War II in the United States. War had already been raging in Europe for a year and a half by the time we were created, and almost 2 years by the time, or more than 2 years by the time the U.S. got involved. So we were sort of born in that, and I think there's kind of a sense among our folks that we rise to that occasion. I think the key thing in any crisis is that you have to go back and look at the fundamental priorities. What are the important things, and how do you establish those? For us, the first one was to protect our people. We call it protecting our force, right? The people that do the good things that our organization does. And I think that's a lesson for all organizations as we go through this. And the second thing we said was, don't give up. It's very easy in a crisis to say, well, we can't deliver on our mission. We can't do anything. And what we said is, no, we're just going to have to deliver on our mission in different ways. And that sparks creativity and innovation. It absolutely, puts strain on people, but at the same time, it really helped them have a sense of purpose through this crisis. And that's really important. And then the third one you mentioned, is just partnering. This is not the time to crawl into your shell. This is the time to reach out to your partners, re-engage them. In our case, it's everybody from the military themselves all the way to our donors and supporters. We have 30,000 volunteers across the world that help support our activities. Reinvesting in them in this time has really made a difference in being able to keep the organization vibrant and keep it focused on what it needs to be doing.
Well, and JD, that's why you're the leader that you are today. It's the ability, again, to see around those corners, to peer around the corner, to be able to say, no, we're not going to retrench. We're actually going to accelerate the impact and the service to others in this time of need, as is stated in your mission. So what I see in the USO and in your leadership is that shining light, is the inspiration, is the ability to inspire people. And for so many years since its founding, the USO has been that organization where in the darkest of moments, in the absolute darkness, you have shown light. And that's what this is all about. And you're doing it today, which is really just incredible. And then we shift to your role as ambassador. You've served our nation in the United States as ambassador to Romania from 2004 to 2005. You managed what was a very, very difficult relationship at the time of the Romanian military deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And during that time, what would you, JD, say was the most rewarding moment for you and why?
Yeah. Well, George, let me just say that I am. It's very nice of the things you say about me, but I'm inspired by the people at the USO, and I'm inspired by the men and women that went before me in this position and others because of the things that they were able to do. And I think one of the things that leaders need to do is they need to familiarize themselves with the leaders that came before them and try to put themselves in their shoes and try to understand, what their challenges were. I think that makes us stronger and it makes us it gives us that sense of maybe if I can't look around a corner, I can at least get a glimpse of what's coming. It was a great honor to be able to serve the United States in Romania. Romania is a fantastic ally of the United States, and I have a lot of Romanian friends built up around it. They say when you go to post that, whatever you expect it to be, the major challenge or major crisis, it'll be something different, and that was certainly the case in my case. I think the most, really, to answer your question, the most fulfilling thing for me was to be able to work with, Romania, remember, came out of darkness. The Ceausescu regime was one of the worst dictatorships in the history of the world. And the Romanian people were suffering greatly, not just from an economic standpoint, but also from a civic standpoint. And so being able to help and work with them to help build civil society in that country, the communists destroyed civil society. They wanted complete control over everything going on. And so Romania had to rebuild that. It had to rebuild trust in itself and trust in its institutions. And that's not something that happens overnight. And it's something you can lose quickly. So I think the small contribution that I played was helping to help that government and the successive governments kind of guide their way through that, and to work with the people of Romania to also help build some of those civic organizations that are really critical to the success of a democracy.
Well, and that brings up a very, very good point in terms of we're on the runway to 2030, as I mentioned early in this conversation, and focused on as a backdrop, a virtual backdrop, the planet, those 17 global goals of the United Nations: no poverty, no hunger, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and of course, global partnerships. And so what opportunities are available, or are you working on or creating at the USO to concurrently help achieve goals like peace, justice, and strong institutions? And how are you doing so?
Right. Well, we're a civic organization. A lot of people will look at the USO, see the red, white, and blue and the stars, and they think we're part of the US government. We're not part of the US government, and we're purposefully not part of the US government. The reason the USO exists, and the reason organizations like this need to exist in a democracy, is that civic organizations are really the fabric that binds people together across a country, right? We play that role. Yes, the government has a very important role in terms of being able to keep the peace and those sorts of things and provide basic services and that sort of thing. But if all we had was the government in the United States, I think we would have a much lesser of a union and a feeling of being Americans and together. And I think that also can transcend to the international stage. We have to think about our global partnerships, our trans-border partnerships. We need to be thinking about not breaking down sovereignty, but increasing sovereignty in those countries by not just by stronger government, which is important in some cases, but also by strengthening those civil contacts, those civil societies. I had a great opportunity to interview Condi Rice about this. And I said, with the USO, why shouldn't the government just do this? And she said she had a great answer. She said, I'm very pro-government. I worked in the government all my life. But she said, JD, the government has no soul. The government can do great things on a large scale, but it isn't going to bring that human touch. And so we need more organizations like the USO, like the International Red Cross, things like that can bring human beings together in a constructive way, not just individually in our own countries, but also internationally.
JD, that was so incredibly well said and incredibly insightful for those global viewers that are able to watch this incredible interview. And switching gears slightly, in your opinion, how is the world different today than it was in January of 2020?
Well, we could do a seminar on that, George. I think the real question is, sooner or later, I'm confident we're going to come out of this. And what I don't think, and I think the question you're really asking is, there'll some things that'll go back to quote normal, whatever that means, and then there are going to be things that have changed forever, right? That aren't. And obviously, I think the way that we interact across our civic organizations, with government, our businesses, is going to change. What we're doing today, which normally we would have been sitting in a studio together having this interview, but what we're doing today actually is probably going to become more of the norm. And I think we're going to have to expect that we will be living a little bit less, less in environments where we're in constant contact with people. And I think that's going to put a strain on human relationships. I think we're going to have to work. One way to think about this is that we're living off the invested capital of human relationships that we've built up over, in my case, decades, and in other younger people, maybe just a few years of life. We're drawing down those bank accounts right now. And so we're going to have to find ways in this new environment, I think, to reinvest in those human relationships, maybe in a way that's different than we did before. It may be more virtually oriented and the like. I think the other thing we're going to have to do is, we're going to have to get very serious about these kinds of these health issues. We've seen a lot of mistakes made, and internationally, a lot of things tried. We're going to have a little bit more patience with some of our institutions than maybe that we have, but we're going to have to invest in those and do some serious work. I know in the Bush administration, we used to run simulations about pandemics like this. With all the challenges we had with the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Hurricane Katrina and all those things, that was the one thing we really didn't have. We didn't have a major pandemic. But I think that we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with these a little bit more effectively and systematically. And I hope in a way that isn't as disruptive to our lives as the approaches that we've taken thus far. So it's going to be a tough time. But on the other hand, I think it's also given us at both as at an international level and here in the United States, an opportunity to come together and do great things.
Taking us back to, the early 2000s, and you think 9/11, you think Iraq, Afghanistan, like you mentioned, and all of the, quote unquote calamities that were taking place. No one would have been able to predict, although there were folks that, had, insights into the possibilities of what a pandemic could look like. And certainly we have 1918 as a reference point and other Ebola and other examples. I think it goes back to partnerships because, and you did see a lot of the partnerships that were established across sectors, including with the USO and the US government and, other companies and NGOs that had these partnerships pre-existing, that were able to rally quickly to understand the capacities, whether it's being able to manufacture masks or respirators or reconfigure their operations. I think there was some of that, but you can never be fully prepared. And as we know in Washington, sometimes it takes a crisis to be able to make things happen quickly, unfortunately. And I think that's a result of what's happened here. Hopefully we have learned that, hopefully we've learned many lessons from that. And so, a great next question here is, what do you see, JD, as a result of all of this is forever changed as a result?
Forever changed. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're gonna see inside the world that I live in, right, which is largely supporting the military. We're gonna see the military trying to figure out better ways to move their people around. So I think the whole basis of transportation is gonna get changed. I mean, you think about here in the Washington D.C. area, metro ridership, those sorts of things. I think people are going to be much less inclined to want to. So I don't want to say change forever, but it's certainly going to be a radical change over the next few years in terms of the use of public transportation and other things like that. I also think you're going to see a change in cities. Look, anybody who's walked around downtown New York, Washington, other places like that, they see a change in the character. It's going to take some time to get back to normal. And, we've seen those kinds of demographic changes in the US before, where people move into the suburbs or the country and then back into the cities, shifting population things. But this is probably going to accelerate that. I also think, obviously it's going to have an impact on how people get their health care, the way they think about their health care. And that's going to have a global impact as well, because, we know that in the developed world, we have access to health care and facilities that are, much better than in many other parts of the planet. And so how we deal with that and how we provide at least what would be considered a standard or a basic healthcare for everyone is going to be a really interesting challenge as we go forward.
Interesting challenge, to say the least. And I'd like to focus a bit on the positivity coming out of all this. So you mentioned several areas, including healthcare. We're seeing an absolutely incredible acceleration in the delivery of healthcare and the modernization of that throughout not only the United States, but across the world, which I believe you can argue is a positive, element of this. We're seeing changes in the way people work, live, play, at least for the moment, in terms of working from home and working, remotely, et cetera. How much of that will remain? I still believe, and I know you may as well, that the in-person convening is also critically important, in addition to the virtual, like we're having a remote conversation today. I think these two elements are important. And so as we're looking at the runway to 2030 and the marker of achieving these global goals, what do you see as one of the biggest inhibitors preventing us from changing the world and achieving these goals?
Yeah, well, when you think about goal 16, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges facing the world, and this is, sadly probably worse in the developed world and some other countries, is corruption. Corruption undermines confidence in government. It undermines confidence in people who want to believe and should be able to believe, I think, that their lives will get better over the course, that the children will have a better situation than they did. It exacts a toll on economic interaction, which should be lifting people and has lifted people out of a lot of poverty. I mean, you think about the investments that were made in Africa and places like that. You know, there's been a lot of positive progress in dealing with some of these issues over the last 2 or 3 decades. But corruption is kind of like the acid that seeps into all of these things and fragments them and weakens them. And so if I had to pick one thing, it would be that. And I think, you know, people across the planet should not stand for it. They shouldn't stand for corruption in government. They shouldn't stand for corruption in their economic institutions, their businesses, and things like that. It's a very important problem, and it's one that we need to tackle and recognize and really put effort into.
And obviously, I couldn't agree with you more. Coming from a law enforcement family, I think that is the top of my list as well. I think the issue of corruption being one of your top inhibitors to achieving the global goals is very interesting and something that our global audience should pay close attention to, because it's pervasive in certain parts of the world and even happens here in the United States on occasion. So it's not even perfect here.
Anyway,
JD, could you repeat that?
I said it can happen anywhere. Corruption can happen anywhere, but the question is not. I mean, I think it's part of the human nature in a way, and the question is not whether there will be corruption or not. The question is whether or not you have the rule of law and a set of frameworks that oppose corruption, that seek it out to eliminate it, or ones that are the opposite, that encourage it, or to turn a blind eye to it. Right? That's what the fundamental difference is.
Well, and that's and to your point, and I think the rule of law is vital. So focusing on that rule of law and always demanding that we have a minimum standard is critical. Zero corruption. So that's critical. Maybe that's the 18th goal. Zero corruption, no corruption by 2030. That's a good goal. JD, maybe that's your goal. I like that. What is your post-summit ask for our global audience as we continue to change the world together with you and organizations like the USO?
Yeah, I think it's really to not view global problems as this big, vast, difficult global issue that somebody stronger than me, more powerful than me, richer than me, whatever, needs to solve, and I'm going to sit and judge them for it. But to ask yourself individually, what role can I play in making positive change? It may be very small. It may be in your community. It may be even in your family. Because if you think about human society, we really are a group of individuals who are bound together in units of families and of civic institutions and states and governments and the like. And if everybody takes care in doing what they're doing and improving the people's lives around them, including their own lives, that will be infectious. That will spread. That's the kind of virus we want to spread, right? And you know, it is. I used to say that the most important thing I've done in my life, with all the positions I've had, is I believe I've raised 2 responsible citizens who are going to carry on after I'm gone. Something as simple as that is contributing to changing the world. It's contributing to the positive things that need to happen to make the life better for billions of people across the planet and hundreds of millions here in the United States. So that would be my one ask. Don't don't think it's too big for you to start today to make a difference.
And that's why JD Crouch, CEO and president of the USO, is such an incredible leader, such inspiration. Thank you so much for all you're doing at the USO with your incredible team. It's important to have a great leader, and we understand it takes a team. Thank you for that. Thank you for all you're doing. And thank you for changing the world, JD. Where can folks learn more about the USO?
Go to www.uso.org.
Well said. Thank you.